This is not an election for the Moetzet Gedolei Israel or for one of the Lamed Vav Tzadikim. It's an election for the President of the United States. I would go with Trump's track record as president for 4 years, especially when it comes to his policies on Israel, which were almost exclusively good, versus Harris, who has no track record other than being a failed president's vice president.
I think the Jewish community in general is in a fighting mood. And I think there's nothing that the Jewish community or I would like to fight with FDR more than his horrific history on the Holocaust and his horrific rewriting of history of his biographers afterwards, talking about how good he was and the missed opportunities, and he really tried, which we know is for the most part complete nonsense. And so I'm in a fighting mood. You know, I like to get in some fights around my sukkah sometimes, have spirited debates.
Welcome to the Fourcast, where four frum pundits talk politics. Meet the all-star lineup.
I'm Binyamin Rose, Mishpacha magazine editor-at-large.
I'm Maury Litwack, Teach Coalition CEO and political insider.
I'm Stu Loser, a longtime Democratic communications strategist.
And I'm Eli Steinberg, conservative commentator.
Okay, so let's get down to politics.
2 weeks until the election, and we are here with a special Chol Hamoed edition of the Fourcast. With me today, as always, are the incredible panelists who are going to give us some insights as we edge closer and closer to this monumental election. We're going to hear today not just about the election, what we think is going to happen, but what's going to happen after the election. And we jump right into it because a lot of people may not know this, but since Reagan, there has been a Bush, a Clinton, a Biden, a Trump on every ticket. And so for 40 plus years, we've had basically some of the same things again and again. But post this election, despite what Stu may tell you, or Ellie may tell you, one of these people has to actually lose, right? No, not both of them are going to win. After this, what's going to happen here? What happens to the Republican Party? What happens to the Democratic Party when one of them wins? It seems like there should be somewhat of a reckoning. So we're going to talk about that right in there and launch right into it. Harris wins. What happens to the Republican Party post a Harris victory? Stu, what do you think?
Splits in two, potentially really splits in two between one side who is MAGA, anti-immigrant, anti-globalist, like Donald Trump says. We all know what that means and everything he stands for, and a reasonable centrist, pro-legal immigration, pro-business, pro-entrepreneur, pro-Israel party.
To me, there's no way. I don't agree with Stu because I don't know how he would split into two, considering the fact that there doesn't seem to be a Trump wing of the party someone could pick up. It's not like any of the other presidential candidates sort of picked up the Trump MAGA world and was able to run with it. So I think this resorts back to what we saw of the Republican Party previously. Ellie, what do you think?
Totally different opinion than both of you on this, to be expected, right? The one thing that we really know right now is the political realignment is real. The Republican Party is not anymore the corporate party, the big business interest party. It's not only that, it very much did start pulling in the working class voter, and not just the white working class. It pulled in the working class voter from across racial lines. And that, I think, is going to stay. The future is bright because you have young standard bearers like we're seeing now when everyone's getting to see J.D. Vance, the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis. These are young talent that are going to be able to pick up the flag and run with it.
Binyamin, do you agree with that? You think that the future is bright for the Republican Party post-Trump, or you think there's going to be a civil war amongst the Republican Party per Stu?
I think what you have to keep your eyes on first is what happens at the RNC. Trump's takeover of the party is partially through his takeover of the Republican National Committee, and his daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, is one of the chairs of that committee. What happens, let's say, if Trump loses? Does she get bounced? So that'll be the first sign. If she doesn't, if she can hold her own, then that means that the Trump wing still has control over the party and they'll continue to exert that control. If she gets dumped, ceremoniously or unceremoniously, then I think we'll see some new blood take over and the Republicans will have to rebuild. And then the question becomes around who do they rebuild? Ellie mentioned some names, but there's other options. There's also Nikki Haley, there's Marco Rubio, there's Tom Cotton. And I think that would probably be the more moderate type of Republican that Stu was referencing.
Ellie, you have a different opinion, but I also just want to drill down as you're talking about these things. You talk about a wide bench, but these are not, a lot of these candidates mentioned, both you mentioned, Binyamin mentioned, they have not won these primaries. So in what world are they able to sort of take the flag and go do that?
Yeah. So two things. First of all, just to Binyamin's point, the reason why Trump really ended up taking over the RNC is part of the reason why it's never going to revert to, your father's RNC again. It's because the people at the RNC were so inept and were doing such an awful job. There was a wide opening for him to take over. That being said, I don't think that there's the donor class definitely thinks that Nikki Haley is going to be like the future of the party. She's not. She's the past. As much as I enjoy Nikki Haley's tenure at the UN, but she's the past, not the future. Candidates who are talking the language of the new Republican base are the ones who are going to be able to take it and move it forward into the future.
Let's give Stu the last word on this before we move to the Democrats to really irritate all of our Republican listeners. Stu, give us a final word on how you think the Republican Party is going to go.
I absolutely end up agreeing with Eli. Republican Party is going to become more MAGA, and it leaves everyone. Eli talks about the donor class, but it's the pro-business, centrist, reasonable Republicans are going to be homeless and looking for a place to go.
The inverse question is, Trump wins. Seemingly, there's a huge reckoning within the Democratic Party. They had to replace Biden. They had to scramble for that. There were certainly a lot of good candidates on their bench, and they had to go with this sort of overnight process, which wasn't much of a process. And so there should be somewhat of a very large reckoning as the Obama administration basically isn't the future of that party. So who grabs that party? Who takes that over? Eli, let's start with you on that, and you could add your commentary on what Stu just said as well.
The first thing that the Democrat Party is going to have to do, Democratic Party is going to have to do is they're going to have to come to grips with, once again, letting Barack Obama down. The man keeps on going out on the campaign trail, telling everybody how much he expects more from them and how much everybody who doesn't vote for Kamala Harris is letting him down. So that's the first thing. They'll lead some epic coping sessions to deal with that. The second thing is, and this again goes to what Stu was saying before, the donor class is going to be the hardest hit. Reporting out just recently, Kamala Harris raised $1 billion. $1 billion. So this is the big donor candidate. It's not even Trump, it's Kamala Harris. The bench of the Democrat Party is not exceptionally deep. Obviously, if Kamala Harris loses, and she'll lose Pennsylvania, the front runner will be a certain governor from Pennsylvania who she wasn't so inept she would have picked for her running mate, Josh Shapiro. I fully expect the Democratic Party to do exactly what political parties do all the time, which is to learn the exact wrong lesson from the election and double down on all the things that alienated voters that make it impossible for them to vote for Kamala Harris and move forward with that.
Binyamin, you agree with that assessment? Do you see the future as brighter for the Democratic Party? How do you see their bench? Certainly, if there had been a convention process, I think a lot of stars would have shined within the Democratic Party, including, as Eli mentioned, Josh Shapiro, but also Newsom and others. I think they have a lot of people who are there. I also think that the other interesting thing also, Binyamin, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, is the Democratic Party coalesced extraordinarily quickly around their candidate, including like the AOCs of the world also. Wouldn't you argue that they're more unified and united with their ability to do that than the Republican Party is?
Talking about the Democrats being united is something that we're not really used to. I still remember from the 1968 convention in Chicago where the Democratic Party was torn apart on the streets. They picked some pretty bad candidates over the years. Mike Dukakis comes to mind more than anybody else. I don't know that they have such a deep bench. Gavin Newsom makes an attractive appearance, but I don't see him as a man of great substance or that he's crazy popular in California. People talk about Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, but not that many people know her that nationally. The Democrats' biggest problem, in my mind, is that they're basically held in the grips of their progressive wing. And that progressive wing gets stronger every year. And with every election in Congress, almost 100 or more than 100, the Democrats are now part of the Progressive Caucus. And I think they're getting farther away from the values and the interests and the positions of mainstream Americans. And that's going to be their biggest shift. If they lose this election, they're going to have to decide, where do they want to go? Do they want to go to the left and continue in that direction, or do they want to drift back to the center? I think they're going to go to the left, and they're going to have a much harder time attracting votes.
What do you think, Stu? You think if there's a left-wing problem, it's a growing left-wing problem that's going to split the party? You think there's going to be a civil war on the Democratic side?
Look, there's going to be absolutely not a civil war, but there's going to be a lot of hand-wringing and blame setting. There's going to be a panel. There's going to be a fight about who's on the panel. There's going to be a fight about what shape the table should be for the peace talks. Students of modern Israeli history will, get the reference in which we won't even be able to get anywhere because we will fight about the size of the table. We won't be able to get peace. But Binyamin is wrong about the leftward's drift of the party. It's not true. Their star...
It is true.
No, it is not true. Representative AOC was the sole person, the leader of the Joe Biden's stay-in faction. When people far to her, not nearly as left as her, were arguing out, the party in every Democratic primary, which is in a competitive congressional race, not a safe Democratic seat, where sometimes actually, quite often the liberal wins, not always the more progressive wins. But when there's a case to be made to regular voters, to voters who aren't progressive, 100% of the time in congressional primaries in the last 8 years, the more centrist, less progressive person won, because Democrats ultimately want to win and will win with the candidate who they think is best set for a general election, which is why we got Kamala Harris in the first place. We got Kamala Harris, of course, because she was vice president. And if, God forbid, Joe Biden hadn't just been deciding whether or not to step down, but actually was completely incapacitated, she would be the nominee. She would be the president. But she's the nominee because she is the centrist candidate within this world.
Okay, Ellie, give me 30 seconds and then Binyamin's going to close for us.
In what universe is the most liberal senator in the entire Senate, the centrist candidate?
She's absolutely not the most liberal senator, but not by any measure. She's a gun-toting, tough-on-crime prosecutor.
Stu, you can't even say that with a straight face.
No, she is a tough-on-crime prosecutor. I remember 4 years ago when she ran and the left called her Kamala the cop. She is a cop.
Yes, Kamala is
vote
cop,
for her because she's a cop.
Kamala is a cop. Yes, that is true. But she's also the same person who is. We'll go through all her list of everybody
we
knows.
got the point. 10 more
This
seconds,
is what
Ellie, and then I want to
Republicans
give
always say
Binyamin the
about the
final
craziest
word.
thing. No, she's a centrist candidate.
Her struggle is because everybody knows she's a lefty, and she's trying to convince everyone she's not, and everyone can see through it. She's not
true.
A centrist.
Not true.
All right, Binyamin, give us the final word here in response to what Stu said about your commentary.
I'll just repeat the fact that 100 members of the House Democrats, which is 50% of their membership, are either part of the Progressive Democratic Caucus or align with it in some way. So that tells you that half the party is to the left of center. And I'd also say just take a look at the relative positions between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party on the war that's going on right now between Israel and Gaza and Hezbollah, and what might happen with Iran, or by the time this airs, what might have happened in Iran. And I think anyone who takes a look at the different positions on that will see very clearly that the Democrats are quite far to the left on that as well. They're more concerned about the humanitarian issues on the Palestinian side, which was caused, all those problems were caused by their own rulers. And none of them are concerned at all about the 100,000 or more Jews who are out of their homes.
I know we're way over time, but every Democrat who voted against Iron Dome got eliminated in a primary by the Democratic Party. When people vote against Israel...
No, because Iron Dome is great. Everyone loves
Almost
Iron Dome.
everyone.
Because what Iron Dome means is Israel, you've got a missile defense system. Just sit back, take all the attacks, don't go on the offense, don't fight back against your enemies, just sit back and absorb rockets.
But we got to keep going.
It's Chol Hamoed. People have time to listen. They have extra time. Binyamin brought up Iran, and I want to remind people, because it happened Erev Yom Kippur, or Yom Kippur in some places, that Vladimir Putin, who Donald Trump sent COVID tests to and spoke to 7 times, at least as ex-president, met with the supreme leader of Iran. I didn't bring up Iran, but if you're going to bring up Iran, say that the Republican Party is led by Donald Trump.
I must say, even the New York Times in their article on that said they could not confirm that Trump spoke to Putin 7 times.
Okay, so we're going to get our lightning round here. Hopefully we keep this episode within time. We'll see. Let's kick it off for Chol Hamoed with a little something fun. Is there someone in the last 200 years that you would invite? I'm not sure you'd invite them into your Sukkah, but you would invite them in general over Sukkahs in general. Ellie, anybody who comes to mind for you?
Yeah, just in the spirit of unity, I would choose to sit down with, in this moment, Ed Koch, just because I think he'd have a great read on the moment, and his quote, which is my favorite political quote, if you agree with me On 7 of 10 things, vote for me. 10 of 10, see a psychiatrist. That's the perfect quote for these days.
Benjamin, what about you?
I'm going to go with Napoleon.
Nice.
That's a little more than 200 years, but Napoleon was quite an interesting character who actually had quite a lot of an influence with his war where he got into the Middle East, and it was a failure for him. So I'd like to hear a little bit about what he says in retrospect about foreign involvement and intervention in the Middle East, because it's basically doomed to failure. But I'd also like to hear, there's a famous story, I don't know if it's urban legend or not, but that Napoleon went to a synagogue in Paris on Tisha B'Av and he saw Jews mourning and said, why are they mourning? And they told him that they're mourning for the temple that was destroyed 1,800 years ago. And Napoleon reportedly said that if there's people who can mourn for their temple after 1,800 years in their homeland, then they have a real hope for regaining them. I'd like to know if that's a real urban legend or if he really said it and what the context was.
I like it. Stu.
I am actually going to agree in part, take a little bit from Eli and Binyamin both. Eli says he wants someone at Koch is a great read on the moment. Napoleon, obviously, probably the most famous Frenchman. I'm going with Émile Zola, author of J'accuse, guy who brought the Dreyfus affair to the public eye, showed the inherent built-in anti-Semitism of the world, and eventually inspired Herzl and importantly led to the state of Israel. I would like to sit down with him and say, excuse me, you know more about exposing the hypocrisy and anti-Semitism of an era than anyone. What can you teach us to do today?
For my sake, that's why I was careful with the language I said, because not everybody, I would like to talk to people, but not everybody would I had in my actual sukkah. So I would, for example, would love to talk to FDR. And I think the Jewish community in general is in a fighting mood. And I think there's nothing that the Jewish community or I would like to fight with FDR more than his horrific history on the Holocaust and his horrific rewriting of history of his biographers afterwards, talking about how good he was and the missed opportunities, and he really tried, which we know is for the most part complete nonsense. And so I'm in a fighting mood. You know, I like to get in some fights around my sukkah sometimes, have spirited debates. So I don't know if I'd have him in my sukkah, but I definitely would have a fight with him outside of my sukkah if I could talk with him.
Yeah, I definitely would have landed in the sukkah.
I'd invite everybody here for that fight. Everyone agrees with me. They love that fight. Okay, we've got some questions here from our listeners, which is awesome, amazing. We love listeners. Hear that? Our first question comes from Stroll, who asks, will Trump's lack of focus on mail-in ballots stymie him again? And it's funny, I told people before the last election that I thought Trump was going to lose. And people said to me, why do you think Trump's going to lose? And I said, because he's literally, at the time, was downplaying the importance of mail-in ballots in swing states. And him and his surrogates were doing this. And so I'm like, how are you going to win if you're discouraging people from voting? What do you think, Stu?
I think Trump's lack of focus in general is really problematic for the Republican Party. I think that him inviting donors in and screaming at them for being disloyal and not doing enough when they've given hundreds of millions of dollars because he wants billions of dollars is problematic. I think Trump's inability to talk about anything other than himself and about how he feels as opposed to how regular people feel, a sort of second-degree calculation people have to make, is really problematic. Mail-in, I think maybe they fixed it. Who knows? We'll see.
Benjamin?
Trump is pushing a lot harder recently on mail-in ballots and early voting. I'm just looking at the day that we record at an article at CNN, which says that the Trump campaign has sent out 286,000 robocalls in the past week to voters in swing states in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, and Michigan. They're working a lot harder on getting the early vote in than they ever did before. And they need to, because as I kept saying and writing in my column, turnout is going to be the key factor in determining who wins this election.
Absolutely.
Ellie?
Yeah. I hate to correct the listener, but the actual data is not what the listener thinks it is. For example, as of this recording, 3 separate states, Republican Party is up by 96% the requested ballots in Pennsylvania. Maury knows how important Pennsylvania is. Nevada,
That's 96%
however,
of a low number from 4 years ago.
Yes, but obviously if you're up 96%, it's a big number. Nevada, however you pronounce it, I never get it right. Republicans actually lead Democrats in ballots returned. And in Florida, where in 2020, the Democrats had a 14-point lead in early ballots returned, but it's only 6, and everybody knows how Florida turned out in 2020. So I don't think it's going to be an issue. The question just is whether these increased ballots on the Republican part are cannibalizing election day vote, which we know they will win, or if they're new voters who are voting by mail.
Yanti Stern asks us, he says, I see from conversations with my coworkers, Jewish and otherwise, that although many have their problems with Trump, they just don't feel they like or connect to Harris. Why do you think that is? Why don't we give it to Eli first to get the fireworks going?
People don't like Kamala Harris because she's inauthentic. You can't connect to somebody who's not real. And it's by design, okay? I get it, because if she's going to say something of substance, she's going to alienate part of her very fragile coalition that she's putting together. But contrast these two candidates. Do you think that the Kamala Harris that you see on this campaign trail is the Kamala Harris that you would get behind closed doors? Of course not. You better believe that Trump is the same person behind closed doors as you see out there. And that's what people connect to. They don't connect to someone who's just fake.
You have to look at competence more than character when deciding to vote in the presidential election.
So vote Harris.
This is not election for the Moetzet Gedolei Israel or for one of the Lamed Vav Tzadikim. It's an election for the president of the United States. I would go with Trump's track record as president for 4 years, especially when it comes to his policies on Israel, which were almost exclusively good, versus Harris, who has no track record other than being a failed president's vice president.
Do you, Stu?
A failed president who sent, for the first time, the first president who sent American soldiers and sailors to the Mediterranean Sea and shot down Iranian missiles and Iranian projectiles. That's the failed president.
So
no
did
president
Jordan.
has ever done it before.
I want to hand it over to Stu, but I just want to say that to the listener's question, Stu, and this is, I think, a real thing, and it's hard to debate this, which is in the history of American presidential races, we've never seen someone jump in with the shortest amount of time and get sort of raving fans that you have. Yes. And as much as you're wearing a Harris Walls hat, I have yet to see a lot of people.
Harris.
Harris. Unless you're wearing one, I have yet to see people walk around the streets wearing them. And I think that really speaks to the essence of the listener's question, which is, do you think that there is sort of like raving fans and momentum behind it, as opposed to what the listener is asking, which is just people saying, oh, I don't want to vote for Trump again. And I remember seeing a lawn sign which says, we're not going back. That's not for who we are. We're not going to this guy. So how do you respond to that?
I think most people, the listener certainly is correct, and most people are correct. People don't know Kamala Harris, don't know her all that well, exactly because of what you said, because of how curtailed the process is. One of the two or three in American history we know the least about, maybe Calvin Coolidge. But here's the important part. All Americans know Donald Trump, and a majority of them don't like him and will not vote for him. It starts from the beginning. No, Republicans have never won. You talked more in the beginning about the history of the elections. No Republican has won since Bush. First Bush since the 1988. No Republican has won a majority vote in the United States except once post 9/11. Most of the time, most people vote against the Republicans, and Donald Trump people have very strong feelings about, and a majority of Americans don't like him, so they don't know enough about Kamala Harris, but a majority have very strong anti-feelings about Donald Trump.
Yes, but why don't people like Kamala Harris?
We're gonna close with a little treat for Chol Hamoed, which is we're going to close our eyes and we're going to pretend that we are running one of the campaigns. Closing our eyes, we're pretending we're running one of the campaigns. You can pick which campaign you want to run, or you can give advice for both campaigns. And you are going to pretend you're the campaign manager. And what is the advice you give in these next 2 weeks? You have advice to give in the next 2 weeks, which it's Chol Hamoed. So people, listeners can do the same exercise in their Sukkah. And we're going to do it right here, right now. If I was either campaign manager, and again, I'm extremely biased in this, I would say to them, got to focus on the Jewish vote. I think it's going to come down to places like Pennsylvania. I think that not only that, but a red wave or blue wave, there's 3 congressional districts in New York that can swing the House red or blue. So to me, the Jewish community, the Jewish voters are critical. And so to me, I would say, hey, wait a second, how's that going over there? Which is why I think you're seeing on the Harris side, Richie Torres start to run around a very popular Democratic surrogate. And I think there's going to be a lot more of this going on. So if I were them, I keep focusing on the Jewish community. Eli, what would you do? You're gonna give Harris some advice here? Or you're giving Trump some advice how to win? Who are you helping?
No, I'm not going to give the Harris team any advice in case they're listening. But I will say that I think that the Trump team has to keep pounding these economic issues that make a difference to people, talk about what's going to be different and why people are going to have a life where they can pay for groceries, where they can find jobs, and where doing what's right and playing by the rules and doing what's right will be rewarded, and not just assets given away to people who cut the line.
Benjamin?
I would advise Trump, don't waste your time anymore in the blue states, in states that you can't possibly win. Spend every minute of your time in the 6 or 7 key swing states that you need to win in order to win the election. Ditto for Vance. And forget everyone else. You don't need to win the popular vote. You need to win the Electoral College, and that's what he's got to focus on. As far as Harris is concerned, what I would tell Kamala Harris is to be yourself. Give a straight answer to a question. Forget all of the coaching you're getting. Forget all of the canned lines that you're giving out. Get away from them. You were once a prosecutor. When you're in a court of law, you ask very pointed questions, and you're looking for yes and no answers. You're not looking for the respondent to ramble on. So I would say the same thing to her. Stop with the nonsense. When you're asked a question, give a straight answer. Keep it brief. You've been in government for over 20 years as a prosecutor, an attorney general, a senator, vice president. You got to know something about what's going on in the issues. Answer a question straight, and then you might have a chance.
My advice to Donald Trump: A, let Trump be Trump. Keep on coming to places like Madison Square Garden, middle of Manhattan, and talking about your issues and your grievances, because it makes you feel good, Mr. Trump. So it must be the right thing to do. And please keep talking about, Mr. Trump, how you alone can outsmart Vladimir Putin. The Vladimir Putin who is agreeing to fund Iran, the Vladimir Putin who is strengthening his alliance with Iran on Yom Kippur so that they continue to fund Israel. Please talk about how you, Donald Trump, are smarter than Vladimir Putin, not the other way around, and let voters decide who's smarter, Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin. Let's all put everything into Donald Trump's intellect and his ability to outsmart people and not get tricked. That would be the way Donald Trump could do the most good for the American people.
I see what Stu did there. You know, it's not the perm edition yet, Stu. I see what Stu did there. All right. We appreciate all of our listeners, as always. If you have your own perspective, if you agree with us, if you disagree with some of the things that are said on this, if you have your own campaign analysis and you say, hey, I got to get this on in the next 2 weeks so that the campaigns hear what I have to think, please reach out to us at podcast@mishpacha.com. Again, podcast@mishpacha.com, where we will, if we like it, we will put this question on air, answer it for you. And until then, we will enjoy your Sukkah, enjoy Chol Hamoed. We will see you next time.